So I am joined now by Sheli O'Connor from the Hospice of Waterloo Region. Sheli, welcome.
Thank you.
The Hospice and Grand River Film Festival. This has been more than a year, I guess, since we first had our first talk. It was before the pandemic. We met in Uptown Waterloo and
That's
had a
right.
conversation. And I think at that point we were just seeing if there was maybe some potential for a partnership. And here we are with three wonderful short films that are the product of your You Only Die Once contest that I think had probably exceeded the expectations of what maybe we were expecting to get. Tell me a bit about the hospice and its mission.
Okay. It's funny because a lot of people are confused about what hospice is. I welcome the opportunity. So Hospice Waterloo Region, it really is there to support individuals who have a terminal illness or an advanced illness and their families. And not just, it's not just about the bed. It's not just about giving them a bed at the very end of life, but supporting them through their journey, through the time of their diagnosis and the struggles that they have over time, to support them and their families, not only to support them with the medical treatment part, but also to look at their needs, their psychosocial needs, their emotional needs, their practical needs, like getting a drive to a medical appointment, helping them to think about what their life means to them and what they want to do until the time that they die. So we do this with over 250 volunteers, and we have actually been a community hospice. So we've been going out to support people where they live, anywhere in the community. And we only recently, in March, opened up our new building, which has the addition now of a 10-bed residence. So up until this spring, we were supporting people in their own homes, in their retirement homes, in their apartments, out in the community. And people forget or aren't aware that hospice has that part. So we are a wraparound, support people and their loved ones who have a terminal diagnosis with whatever they need to live well until they die.
And the new facility is wonderful. I hope you're proud of it. It certainly seems like an excellent way of extending that service that you are already bringing into the community.
Yeah, I think that it's so much more the residence part, which is newer to me because we've been a community hospice, but the beauty of the experience that families are able to have, they come into this, it's not a hospital bed, it's a warm, comfortable, caring environment where the family can then relax and just spend time with their loved one. And that we have the beds, we have a living room area, we have an outdoor patio area that's private for each room. It's a beautiful, peaceful, loving environment for people who are experiencing that part of their life. So I often feel sorry that, because I see it all the time, people have no idea what hospice is. And I think we had a volunteer who said, people need to learn about this now rather than waiting until they're in a crisis. And I tell you that most people who've experienced the time at hospice as a family member will tell you, I wish I'd known about it sooner.
Yeah. Why a short film contest? Of all the potential forms of outreach and community interaction.
So I've spent most of my career doing education, doing presentations, raising awareness on different topics. And my experience when I came to hospice around the topic of death and dying and grief was that if hospice had a booth or had a presentation on hospice, you have very little interest, or people would see you at a table and they go make a wide streak around you so they didn't have to stop and talk. So the avoidance of the topic has always been a challenge. As I said to you before, in actual fact, talking about death, dying, and grief can actually be a very tender conversation, can be uplifting, but we avoid them. So that's a fact. That's definitely obvious. And so I can only do so many PowerPoints. And what I found was that art it's almost like it's a catalyst. It sparks conversation because it reaches you emotionally. So that was where I started with, okay, let's look at art. And running into you and having a conversation about film, we've done some other different kinds of art projects, but I've never done film. And your passion for this topic area, and for what these artists can accomplish, really was the reason. And I think that, so looking at film as a way that we could engage people, but also looking at artists, perhaps were younger, who had that enthusiasm and that creativity and a different perspective, would be a really neat way to try and engage audiences. So that's where we started.
I mean, I can't disagree. I've always said, art is kind of one of those ubiquitous things that everybody interacts with, and especially film. I always say it's the quintessential 20th century art form. It doesn't matter who you are, you have a favorite movie, and people like to talk about movies, and nothing sparks conversations more. I think, because nothing has more of that outreach or access to a wider swatch of people across our culture and community, and especially something like this where conversations about death and dying, how taboo you feel about it is really culturally driven, and some cultures are much more comfortable with it, and some, and I would argue, the more dominant cultures in Canada are much more, let's pretend it's not there.
I think the long-term kind of goal is, we as a society, we as a northern hemisphere kind of society, we live better, we have more money, we've been able to build our medical system, and we allowed, years ago, we allowed hospices to take over healthcare, all of it.
Right.
And that fit with where we were going. Back in the 1930s, 40s, people died at home. And as we became more of we can save people, we can treat them and make them better, we focused in on that, and we kind of forgot about, what about death? How do we support people who are at the end of their life? So we need to take it back and play a role in that. And if we can't even talk about it, how are we going to support our neighbors? How are we going to support our family members or our colleagues at work if we won't even go there? So that's the long range. Let's build a more compassionate community that focuses on supporting each other and is confident in that. But you can't do it if you don't start talking about it.
Right. Yeah. It's true. And especially over this last year where, it's not comparable, but in the last year, so many people have been touched by tragedy. And I think that it's almost overwhelming, and we want to hide from it again. But it's also a reminder that these sorts of conversations are important ones to have, because you never know what's going to happen. And if you have those conversations early and outside of any emotional trauma, then they are, important, and when the time does come, potentially life-changing sorts of conversations to have had.
Yeah. One of the books that we often tell people to read is called With the End in Mind by Catherine Mannix. And she talks about, we avoid these conversations like they're a battle. And in actual fact, they are actually tender conversations between people who care about each other. So we need to get over the stigma and over the reluctance. And I think film and conversation is the way to do it.
And it's interesting, from the film side of things, I've certainly seen a shift in the last few years where there are a lot more films that think about death in that way. On film, it's always about drama. Even if it's a comedy or a science fiction film, you always want to find that drama. So, and the easiest way to find drama from the concept of death is to make it a big tragic thing and to have people, enveloped by grief. But there's certainly been a shift in the types of films that some filmmakers, especially in independent film, are making, that are looking at it as being that very natural element of life, and something that we should talk about. And I'm thinking of movies like The Farewell, which does a great job of showing a family that is still in denial about something, and then there are younger members of the family who don't want to live in that lie. Those sorts of stories are very powerful, and I hope will become increasingly the norm in storytelling, especially when the storytelling is much more personally driven. And it's very interesting in programming this year's film festival with this partnership in mind. It really changed how I was watching the films that we were considering, and watching how they were discussing death. And it was very comforting to me that we received a number of short film submissions outside of the contest, from international locations that really did fit this same kind of idea. This idea that death is not a horrible thing that needs to be avoided, but it can be a positive thing if we give it the opportunity. We have the chance beforehand to have those conversations and to accept its inevitability and to approach it with grace. And we had received enough of those submissions that with the contest winners from your contest and those submissions, we could put together an entire program, a feature length program, which I don't know if I would have even considered before our partnership. And that's terrific. And anyone who watches that program, hopefully they walk away with a much more uplifting or a much more hopeful perspective, and a willingness to have those conversations with people. Being a virtual theater, you're watching this at home. Hopefully after they watch these films, the audience can just turn to whoever they're watching them with and start that conversation immediately. So
that's how you get started, though. One conversation leads to another conversation, and it's personal too. So it's good that they have a chance to start there.
Yeah. And I think that that's really something that these films that the contest has produced really drives home, is this is not, death is universal, but this is not a universal conversation. It is different for every single person. And that's fine. It should be very personal, and it should be unique to every person, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the conversation.
No. And some of the richest conversations are when people have had some of these conversations on a personal level and then bring that to a larger group. We've certainly found, especially with COVID, our online sessions, the conversations are rich, and we learn so much from each other as we are more and more willing to open this up.
Yeah. I mean, this short film contest has been an amazing experience for Griff. I hope that you have equally found it enlightening and impressive. But it's certainly also shown, we've always believed that there's a richness to the local filmmaking community, and even people who aren't filmmakers but are interested in it. And if you give them something like this, a subject that they wouldn't necessarily think of on their own, but you give them that little bit of incentive, and what they can produce in our own backyard is remarkable.
Yeah, then there's something quite exciting and comforting, I guess, in a way, to be able to reach out and become part of this creativity, like to realize that it's in our own communities, and to latch onto it, and to allow these artists, which we did with this competition, to create and to do it on their own and to learn from it. And I have to say, Michael, that having the opportunity to work with Griff has been exceptional as an organization. And we have partnerships all the time, but this has had a certain feeling to it from the outset, and it just keeps getting better and better. And as a partner, you guys have been so generous in helping us move our purpose forward in terms of opening up the conversation, and the fact that you have 2 different segments, 2 different sessions that cover this just, in a pure sense, but that there are other things out there that you've done. it's been amazing, and we just love what you've done and your willingness to be part of this, and being able to capture your passion for film along the way has been a gift.
You know, the films we choose, we always try to find a connection to something that's happening in the community. And this just, it had the benefit of, we had found the connection in the community before we started finding the films. You know, every film, no matter what it is, the themes of the film are always grounded in the human experience, and you can always relate that back to something that's happening in the community. And it's not just that the hospice is here in Waterloo Region, it's that people are going through these experiences, and the short films are made by people in the community, and these are their perspectives, and hopefully the audience has an opportunity to think about the questions that those films raise. And I think all three of the winners really raise interesting questions in vastly different ways.
Yes. Yeah.
And I hope the audience watches them and thinks about those questions in their own context. You know, what does Brian's film mean to me? How do those questions impact me? How do Steffi's questions impact me and my family? How do Kay's questions impact me? And that was certainly, when we were reviewing them, they did ask such introspective and provocative questions that I couldn't forget about them after I was done. And that is the mark of a great film, is that it's not just something you experience for the length of time you're watching it. It lives with you. It comes up. You think about it when you're brushing your teeth the next day, or when you're on your commute, or at times when you least expect it. And I think that these are three very powerful films. And I'm so thankful to the hospice for conducting this short film contest, because it breathed life into these films, and now we have an opportunity to experience them, and as we will in a moment, talk to the filmmakers and experience what they went through making them.
And I'm so glad that you had this opportunity or this idea to bring the filmmakers together, because I think that there's the films, and there was no cookie cutter here. They may have been the same topic, but the way they came at it and their creativity, just incredible results. But it's just that you get a whole different perspective on the film, or a deeper perspective, when you hear them talk about their experiences. So I think the audiences will be thrilled to hear what the artists have to say.
I agree. But before we talk to them, how can people learn more about the hospice and maybe learn if the hospice is right for them?
So, and I would say it again, people, we would so much rather people came to us sooner in their illness trajectory than later, because there's so much we can do to help. And the easiest way is to check out our website at hospicewaterloo.ca, or to call our office at 743-4114. Those two numbers, are the number and the website, are probably the first place to start. As I said, we have over 250 volunteers. We are volunteer based, but right now we're we've moved into this new space. We have COVID to deal with, so we are on hold in terms of taking more volunteers or people interested at this point, but we will be continuing to do that. But in the meantime, the website, or to call and talk to us. And from my perspective, in terms of community engagement, I'm always looking for new ways to reach out to the community, so they can always call me at the office to talk about ideas if they have any.
Fantastic. Sheli, thank you so much.
Oh, right back at you. And just tell people they need to watch the Grand River Film Festival films, because they are exceptional.
And now we are joined by the winners of the hospice contest, Brian Douglas, Steffi Reimer, and Kay Brown. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, congratulations to all three of you. It's great to be in one virtual room with you. My first question to you is that you did a great job on all of your films, was really to have each of you describe for us in your own words your film.
Yeah, this is a hard question to answer. How do you capture 5 minutes? I mean, for me, the film was about kind of life lived experiences and how they shape who we are as people, wanting to kind of convey a message of connection, the importance of maintaining conversation throughout our entire life, but especially up until the point of which we are dying, right? That I think those are really difficult and can be very uncomfortable conversations. And I think for a person who's dying, to feel a loss of connection to people because they're scared, like their loved ones or their people in their world are scared to know how to interact with them, can be really challenging. So I wanted a film that kind of highlighted some of those pieces. Like, yeah, I'm scared too. Like we're both scared, but let's be scared together. Let's connect together. Don't leave me alone in this, because that's the last thing that I want. And so I think that's kind of what my film was about maintaining connections, reconnecting, and really never taking life for granted.
Yeah, I think all three of you did a great job of connecting with your audiences. I think that's what really was a standout in all three films. And I love the way, Brian, you asked the audience directly. That was awesome. It's an excellent way to do it. Steffi?
So my film was an animated film because I really like illustration and I wanted to challenge myself to actually make a film, like a several minute long film. And my story is about a young girl who experiences the reality of death for the first time through a friend who lost a sibling. And she goes through a lot of emotions trying to figure out, how can this even be possible? She associated death with something being terminal at the end of life, and realizing that death is a part of everyone's life and it can happen at any time was shocking for her, and she wants to solve that problem. And she comes to a point where she's extremely frustrated with the reality that there's nothing she can do about it. Death is ultimately a reality we will all face, and she has to face that. And her dad is there to be there with her and just reassuring her that it's okay. We all feel this fear. There's nothing we can do about it. We can just go through it together, just as Brian said. That's what it's about.
Excellent job, Steffi. Really, the animation was incredible, and the story kept everybody with you. I think I mentioned to you about someone saying it was like you had a storybook in front of you, like you were telling it to your children. But I think even for us as adults, we were all right there. So thank you for that. Kay, how about you?
As Brian said, it's hard to capture like the essence of the film, but I wanted to tell the story of what would you do if you knew when your final moments were. If you had a certain amount of time left, what would you do in that time? And I wanted to look at the idea of love in our final moments, finding love and being able to accept that love, and not just looking at the grief, because there's a lot of times there's the story, they tell us like there's a story told about the grief and not about just finding joy in the simple things. So that's what the film is about, the simple things, and asking yourself, what would you do if time was limited, and why not do it now, and why not go out and do those things?
I would say you asked the $1 million question, Kay. I think that was the thing we all said, was that you had everybody right from the first statement. It was excellent. It was really well done. And I also liked the way you used color. I was thinking about that afterwards, the black and white and the color. Some very creative pieces in that. It was excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I was hoping that you'd be able to give us a bit of insight into your journey as a filmmaker. Were these your first films? Is filmmaking your passion? What you want to move forward with? Is this an outlier? So give us a sense of your journeys, how you got to this point, and where you hope to go from here.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, this was my first real attempt at creating a film. So, I mean, I did like a documentary with my 6-year-old. He wanted to do a documentary on COVID. So like we did that at the start, like over a year ago. But again, that was just more for fun. That was just something to kind of connect and to start conversations within our household. but also within our community. But photography is really, from the creative side of things, where I kind of live, and that's what I do. I can do that professionally. I'm also a social worker. But what really, when this opportunity came up, I've been thinking for many years that I wanted to kind of blend my social work background with kind of my creative process in the photography. So this was an opportunity to kind of blend those two worlds, to try my hand at creating a film, and creating a story, and just venturing down that road. I think when Sheli and I first talked, I had a whole bunch of ideas in my head, like that was over a year ago, because I have for many years wanted to create a film, and it didn't fit for this because but it was a film on life and death and grief and that. So it's been on my radar for a while, and this was an opportunity to finally make something happen, to be held accountable to creating something, right, to committing to something. And so this has kind of sparked in me that kind of that film that I've always wanted to do, is something that I will eventually now kind of do. Like, this got my feet wet. It was a really good opportunity. I really loved it. It's storytelling in a completely different way than a still image. And so, yeah, so now my thinking is, okay, so how do I create those next pieces? How do I continue down this road? How do I create my next piece? Yeah, and I'm excited really to kind of see where it all takes me.
Well, I think you're off to a great start. Steffi.
So I've had a dream of being a filmmaker since forever. I worked as a videographer for a while, but I always had this fear of being a starving artist, so I never fully committed to it. And I've done a lot of other work trying to explore other ways. But when this opportunity came, my roommate, who had been taking several end of life care courses, she's very into this topic, and she pushed me because she said, "You love to talk about this topic, and you've always wanted to create a short film. Do it, Steffi. Do it, Steffi." And it was my last year of my program that I'm finishing now, and I had a thesis going on. A lot was going on in my life, and I ended up doing none of the responsible things, and I just gave myself 1 week to fully commit to just animating. I had worked on the storyboards and the character design beforehand, like slowly. I worked on that over the year, but this is the first time I've made something that I've submitted to a bigger, like a contest or something like that. Other than that, it has been more smaller projects that I worked on. But this reminded me that this is truly what I want to work on. I am also working on a film as my senior project. I worked on it was basically doing the groundwork for a long-term documentary film that I'd like to work on, with the topic of navigating the complexity of all these news we're constantly confronted with. Like, we have so much to work with, and it's very hard for us to understand all the information that we get, especially in topics like climate change or vaccines or anything science related that we don't have any expertise in. So my project has been focusing a lot on the literature review of that part of research, and now the next steps of my projects are, so how can I make this a film, like a film that people can interact with, and working on an interactive documentary for that project. So I'm still looking for funding for that project, and I have another project in the go where I've looked at funding opportunities to create this one film about the loss of identity when your entire identity has been bound to faith and religion. That's where I grew up in Mexico, and I have a few subjects who have separated themselves from the churches, and that has also created a separation between their own identity and community, because your entire community's identity is based on faith. And if you don't share that faith, then how do you deal with this loss of identity? So those are two big projects that I'm currently trying to figure out how I can keep working on.
and they
Yes.
sound like fascinating projects. And I'll just say that from Griff's perspective, we're always very impressed when we see animation of any kind, because it's, animation is not easy, and we were blown away by the product. So, Kay.
So I've always been one of those people who kind of always just knew what I wanted to do, and I haven't changed my mind since then. I think I got my first camera when I was about 8 years old. It wasn't anything like fancy or digital. It was one of those like cameras that you give to kids. And I slept with that camera. I took that camera everywhere, any trip I went on. And then at the same time, I've always told stories. I've always written about everything I've seen, from like my experiences in elementary school to, I think my first ever like short story was about a trip to the zoo and the first time I ever saw penguins. So I've always wanted to combine that love that I found from the camera and capturing images and videos and storytelling and telling untold stories, or the stories that people don't really want to tell. Like, for instance, like the story, like capturing the idea of like death and grief and telling that story. It's something that's often taboo. And I really enjoy being able to just face those hard questions head on and sharing my perspective and the perspective of others who aren't necessarily able to put into words or into like the same creative outlets as media, and helping them along the way. So that's how it started for me. And in terms of where I want to go, I want to continue to keep tackling hard questions. I want to continue to tell untold stories. I really love the idea of that there's so much out there in the world that, even though with technology and social media, we think that we know most of it, but there's still so much that's left to be discovered. So I want to continue to discover those things.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Talking about hard questions, I don't know if you whether you think this is hard or not, but just having seen your original submissions and then worked with you a little bit on giving you feedback from the initial review, I just really was curious as to how you went from where you started to where your final product turned out to be. So, and I wondered what it was along the way that helped you navigate and end up with such a great product.
So, I mean, my original idea was, I knew we weren't able to do a documentary, but I still wanted to kind of be able to originally have conversations with people. My hope was to use questions specifically from dignity therapy or slightly adapted from dignity therapy, to engage in conversations with just friends, family, whoever was willing to have a conversation with me. Really wanting to get people's insights around their perspectives on what, how currently are they living their best life, in order to be like, if they happen to die tomorrow, would they be satisfied? Or are there things that were left unsaid or that they haven't said to people currently in their lives that they know they really should? And really get people thinking about, how do you start creating a legacy now for the inevitability of death? So I started having some of those conversations with people, and they were fascinating. They were really interesting. Some people said, like, I felt like I was having a free therapy session with you. It was great. That's why I signed up, because they knew I was a social worker. But what I quickly realized was, as interesting as those conversations were, I wasn't finding the narrative that I wanted. I wasn't finding the story I wanted, simply because it wasn't personal. I felt, for me to write a narrative that was going to be meaningful, that was going to be honest, that was potentially going to connect with the audience, I had to start asking myself those questions. I had to sit down and tackle that from my own perspective, within the context of my own life. And I think that was the biggest shift from the original concept to where I landed, was everything that those conversations carried with other people was great, and I value those conversations, but it was that conversation with myself that was going to, I think, translate to connecting with the audience. Which then I think also translated into some of the footage throughout the film with kind of my son makes multiple appearances in it. You know, he's 6, and just again, reflecting on this is my life and this is kind of where I'm at and this is what's going to connect. So once I kind of made that decision, I think I wrote the narrative in less than an hour. Like I just sat down and I just kind of got into the headspace and I just wrote with very few. I mean, there were minor adaptations along the way, but literally, like I have the piece of paper here. It's like a front, like it's like 3 pages, and there's some things kind of scratched out, but that was it. And for me, the fact that it came so quickly and it just flowed so naturally, I felt again that there's something meaningful there because I didn't labor over it. It didn't take me a long time. And again, that kind of, for me, connected to that honesty piece that I hope the audiences will connect with and relate to. So yeah, that was the biggest piece. It was flipping it from looking externally to others to really translating it to me. And that changed the entire process for me.
And that is the essence of the whole, reluctance to talk about death and dying is we can talk about the woman down the street or, that other person that we work with, but it really becomes real when we talk about ourselves. So good for you. Your film certainly reflects that.
Thank you.
Steffi.
My main issue was deciding the medium I wanted to go for. So I love animation, and most of my animation is short form. So I wasn't sure what I was going to use. I knew that I couldn't do a modeling thing that would take too much time. At first, I had intended to make stop motion animation because I really like stop motion, but it was too time consuming and there was a lot of things to figure out that I didn't have the time to work around. And then when I worked on the character design, I just jumped to the character design process. And that's when I realized I actually really like this character. I developed that character within 20 minutes and I had 3 different iterations. I showed it to other people, everybody liked this person, and then I just went with it. And writing the story then was quite an adaptation from the first iteration where it was a bit of a longer story. I think you remember there were a lot of animals involved and I took the feedback into account to make it shorter. So it was just her talking. And at first I had a lot of her, I had her dad saying a lot more things to her, explaining things about life to her. And I got some feedback from my roommate saying, maybe it would be nicer if she was the one exploring and discovering things instead of receiving all the answers, because ultimately we don't have answers. We don't know. All we can do is accept things as they are. And I really liked how it ended up. It's much better now than what my first iteration of the text was. So yeah, those were my struggles along the way.
Again, it's that the power of the personal view on it and the experience, isn't it? Well done. Okay.
So my original concept, I wouldn't say changed completely, but it like I was so set on what I originally wanted to do. I think it was originally called Tell Me Now, which is about more so the perspective of family and friends and what you would want to say to your loved ones if you knew that that time was coming and you knew that that was going to be the last thing that you were able to say. And then once again, with the personal aspect of it, I didn't fully connect with the idea as much as I did of tackling questions for myself and what I would want if I knew that my final moments were coming. Not more so what I would want to hear people say to me, but what I would find comforting. What would I want to do and what would I want to like explore in that time? So making it more personal for me is what changed everything. What made me realize that it is so much harder to ask yourself tough questions than it is to look from other people's perspectives. So when I finally did ask myself that tough question, that's when everything just hit me. I was like, okay, this is exactly what I want to do now, and this is how I'm going to do it. And that's how everything became more something that I would be more proud of, is because I knew that I put myself into it rather than just thinking about other people rather than myself, because I find that people connect more when they're able to see that this is something personal, and this is something that if the filmmaker can ask that, or if the film can ask that, then maybe I can ask myself that.
Excellent.
I think it's very telling that the connected thread between all of those, that you kind of focused it on the personal aspect rather than a broader view. More from the filmmaking side of things, and this is something that we've, as a film festival, have observed in the industry. Did the pandemic present any unique challenges to you in terms of making the film?
I think a few of the challenges, well, I think some of the challenges is it created excuses not to create it as quickly as maybe I should have, and to leave things off, right? I can't go out, I'm not supposed to do that. But then I think some of the other challenges that kind of came along the way is there was some footage that I would have liked to create on my own. Like I had to use, I think it was like 4 clips from like a Creative Commons stock video, because I just couldn't create it because of limitations of gatherings and things like that, right? So there's like the one scene of a number of people kind of having a conversation around a campfire and kind of laughing and enjoying themselves. And I would have loved to have recreated that idea. Like I had that idea in my head, and I would have liked to have done that in my backyard or whatever, but we couldn't be gathering with people. I couldn't bring family or people over to create that. So that was really difficult. I mean, this wasn't so much pandemic challenge as much as just living in Canada challenge of weather. That created difficulties again, right? I mean, I would have loved to have created some footage kind of my own around kind of some of the water and pieces like that, just kind of the people jumping off the cliff. Like I absolutely could have created that had been up in the middle of winter. And but the pandemic was difficult just in terms of that flexibility and feeling that I didn't have the freedom of movement, because I was really trying to be respectful of the rules and the procedures in place, and I didn't necessarily want to find myself in situations where I was getting in the way of other people. So I just wanted to be, as a community, I wanted to be respectful and do my part. So that was the biggest piece within the pandemic. But at the same time, what I liked about it is it did force me to think differently and to be more creative with the footage that I had. I think that's always an argument people have with kind of the digital medium, is you can create and have thousands of hours of footage or thousands of still photography to kind of pull from. But I was limited in terms of, I've got this, and how do I work with this to tell the story and to flow and to be somewhat coherent as a film. And I think that restrictiveness was actually kind of, was something that I did enjoy. I mean, it was definitely challenging at times, and there was definitely moments I was like, I don't know how I'm going to finish this piece. But again, I think just sitting with that and tackling that was really a helpful part of the process for me to create something that I was going to be happy with at the end.
Limitations make good art, as they say. So, Steffi.
I personally did not feel that it affected me. It actually kept me grounded in the sense that I can't meet people, so I had lots of distractions, and the pandemic even contributed to my, I got better in my illustration during the pandemic. I illustrated a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, and it really helped me feel more confident in my drawing. So I didn't feel that was a challenging rather than acid.
Just your schoolwork got in the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had other things. Basically, my entire thesis got delayed, and I just finished a big chunk of it last night. So,
Congrats. Okay.
thank you.
I find that I had to change my idea a lot in the sense of the overall concept. Once I landed on it, stayed the same. But originally it's like, okay, how I envisioned it, for instance, I wanted to include more people. Like that was my original idea, is I wanted to include more people. I wanted to go to different locations and do different things. But then every time, for instance, like the policies change, then you have to adapt the film. Because like, okay, I want to go to this place with this many people, but wait, we can't do that. So now we have to like redo it again. But it allowed me to see how beautiful simple things can be. For instance, I had 3 people and one location in one camera, and that was it. And I was able to do so much with just that small, like just the 4 of us. We were able to accomplish so much. And it also allowed me to be more creative in the sense of because people are from like different places and stuff, even though it was the 3 of us, no one was in the room at the same time. It was just me and that other person. So I was able to capture, making it look as though everyone is there and all in the same location. And that was something really interesting to me, was be able to capture something in a new way. That's what the pandemic allowed me to do, was be more creative and see how things can unfold. So like something so simple can be so beautiful. That's, yeah.
It's incredible. Just listening to you, the 3 of you talk, it just adds a whole nother level of depth to your films. And I hope that people will listen, because it's incredible what you're sharing, and the maturity in your thoughts and in your experiences. I'm very impressed. And so my question to you is, what would you say to other filmmakers about producing a short film on this topic, based on what you've been through and what you've accomplished?
I mean, I think personally, I would say take the leap, take the risk, see where it leads you, because you don't know where the conversation and the film is going to go. But I would have been just as happy not sitting here right now. Like I'm super happy that kind of my film won and those pieces, but I would have been just as happy with the end result if nobody else but my friends and family saw it. And so I think sometimes we get stuck in, we're creating this for others, or like, I think social media gives us the message, like, if I'm not getting like so many likes, if I'm not getting so many comments, then it must not be good. But I've always come from the perspective, I create because I want to create things. I do this because I love to do this. And if nobody else sees that, or sees what I see, or even sees the work, I'm still okay with it, because it wasn't about creating it for anybody else. So I think that would be my kind of what I would say to other people considering creating a film. And if it is, and if death and dying and grief and all of those pieces are really challenging, or you don't want to tackle it, then it's probably all the more reason to tackle it. I think, like I say within the film, like it's from discomfort comes change, and from change comes new perspective, and that's kind of a philosophy I kind of work by as a social worker. Is change is hard, change is uncomfortable. If change was easy, we'd all be our best selves all of the time, but we're not, because change does come with lots of consequences. So tackle the hard questions. I think Kay kind of ask the hard questions to yourself, explore the hard questions. You may be surprised of what you actually create at the end, because I think those are some of the most meaningful pieces that people create, are the ones that they didn't necessarily want to, or they didn't necessarily intend to create, but it just sort of happened. So I would say go for it. And I think Steffi said this, death is one of the only inevitabilities of life. So why avoid having the conversation, right? So jump in, see where it takes you. Putting it off doesn't help any of us individually or as a community to not talk about death and dying.
Excellent.
I think Brian already covered all of it.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I can only add to that. Say that I agree with everything he just said. I was going to say embrace the discomfort. And also, you might be surprised by how many people are willing to talk about it if you ask the right questions. It's all about asking the right questions. And like in my household with my roommate, she is very comfortable talking about it. And that was a really good way for me to talk about it. And what I didn't feel discomfort at all. It wasn't until after I was done that I had a somewhat of a quarter life crisis where what am I doing with life? And I just felt that life was going on way too fast. And then for the first time in my life, I had this actual panic of what if I were to die and haven't accomplished a single thing that I want to do? So talking about it it's good. Talk about it in whatever way you can. You don't have to create a film. You will make something you're comfortable with or you're happy with or something you can make in the moment. That's what I would say.
Good advice. Okay.
I'd say Brian captured most of
Sorry,
most
everybody.
of it. Okay. I guess to add also would say don't be afraid to just face it head on. Like don't be scared of the subject because the people watching, the audience watching, the people working on the film with you, they have the same thoughts that you do. You're not alone in your thoughts. So if it brings comfort to other people to know that, okay, I'm not the only person who has had this question. So don't be afraid to pose the question. I think that's what I would say if someone's trying to make a film about this topic.
Just by the very name, the title you gave your film, okay, it's obvious. We thought maybe, that we were all impressed with, wow, that's a great question to start with, to start your film off with, but we thought maybe we didn't realize how intentional you had been in choosing that title. Well done. It came across for sure. Engaged everybody.
Yeah. So if you had any advice to future filmmakers who are maybe not necessarily filmmakers, but they're like yourselves, they're coming from different backgrounds, different mediums, what advice would you give to them in terms of process or technology for getting from that point of saying, I think I might want to do this, to actually having a finished product? If there's anything that stands out to you in terms of helping people push through maybe that initial barrier.
Yeah, I think embrace the idea that things aren't going to work out necessarily as planned. And that's okay. Don't get caught up. I'd probably say don't get caught up on the technology side of things. Like you don't need to be shooting with the best camera and have the latest technology. And like you don't need gimbals and like you don't need all of those things are like, if you can afford it, then more power to you. But I think you can still create something beautiful without all of that. So kind of there's a photographer I follow, Chase Jarvis, and he kind of says the best camera is the one you have with you. You use what you have in front of you, learn how to use it to the best of its abilities, and go from there. I think, within our region, we have some excellent resources like the Common Studio, where through the Working Center, where you can kind of access and rent, lots of equipment if you're in need. So I think we have lots of resources within the Waterloo region for people who don't necessarily have the technology at their hands, but they would like to still create a film. And I think it's also like, I think the other piece, and I mean, this is speaking for myself, like, it's okay if you don't fully know what exactly you're trying to create. Just keep creating, and eventually things kind of work themselves out. And not everything you create is going to be good, and that's okay. That's part of the process of learning. um, and and take what you can from that experience and grow.
I
Just to
like
mention,
to. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I like to say that we all walk around with a device in our pockets that's more powerful than entire film studios used to be 30 years ago. So, sorry, Steffi, go ahead.
I was just pointing out that you used "that's okay" twice in your phrasing right now, and that word, in my household, we have this ongoing joke every time something happens. We say "that's okay," and because I had paid a voice actor to give me several versions of that line. We have like 8 versions of "that's okay." That's okay. And now every time anyone says "that's okay," we make all those different voices. And that has just become the motto of my entire life. That's okay. Everything's going wrong. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. Anyway. So yes, I would say that's okay if you don't have the right equipment, which is what every experienced photographer will always tell you. It's not about the equipment, it's about the story. It's about the story and the composition and the art itself. And that is definitely true. I ended up using Procreate for my entire animation. That's all I used. So basically, frame by frame, if you have any free drawing, like in the case of animation, any free drawing tool these days allows you to make animation. But I am well familiar with the filmmaking process of camera, and it's all about the story. If your story is good, then you'll find a way to make everything else work. The quality of the film, the quality of the camera is not the most important thing. But there are people out there, there are grants you can apply to. There are several resources out there. Yeah.
Okay.
I was gonna say that too. Also, it doesn't matter. Like, your phone is so powerful, and I find that a lot of times, even for myself, when I was just starting in filmmaking, I thought, I don't have a camera, I don't have a mic, like I don't have a tripod, I don't have all these other things. And then I was like, wait, I have a phone. And I've been just being able to, like, a lot of the footage that I did capture was through my phone, was through when I originally wanted to like use like audio from the actors. I used my headphone mic set, I taped it I taped it inside their collar, put the phone in their back pocket, and we just went with that, and it captured a lot of great sound. So I find that a lot of times it's not about the equipment, it's about what you do with what you have. And sometimes the story tells itself, because originally I did have a script in place, and we did do like different audio takes and stuff. But after, when we were watching the footage, I originally just recorded what I was saying as the footage was playing out, as the story was told, just with the images and just what came to me as I was watching the images. So sometimes the story does tell itself. Like, don't be afraid to capture everything that you see or what's around you, because there is a story in everything that you see.
So I'm going to combine this last questions for me, because we've talked a little bit about what you've learned about the death, dying, and grief conversation, but just want to turn it around a little bit and talk about your friends and family and your networks, because the Yoda contest was really about Hospice Waterloo Region in partnership with Grand River Film Festival, trying to look at ways to spark the conversation in the audiences. When we go out and talk to groups, we're trying to get people to open up this conversation with the hope, by talking about this, that they will then be more comfortable supporting each other. So I heard what you said about what you learned about these conversations, but I wonder what you think about your broader network. And if they're the audience of these films, what would you be saying to them about this topic?
I think for me, like I come from a place where and I think it's come from the social work background where we like I engage in these conversations kind of openly within the context of my world, right? Outside of kind of this film and photography. So like over the course of the entire process of making this film, and you know, my 6-year-old was a part of he knew what we were doing, right? Like he knew what I was creating. He knew this was a film on death and dying. I was able to kind of relate it. Our dog died in August of last year. So we were able to kind of engage in conversations about death and what does that mean? And so I think within the context of my group of people, family and friends, I think I'm pretty privileged where it's not a topic that's uncomfortable or that we shy away from. And again, I think it's partially just because of the nature of the work I do. I've held some difficult roles within the context of social work, and just in terms of what I like work with in the families and the kids that I support, right? So, you know, if I'm at my in-laws or when we were able to be out and about, and you know, if they have friends over and they're asking what I do, like I'm a social worker and I support people who struggle with mental health, and I do suicide risk assessments, and like this is just right. I mean, just like if you know other people talking about their careers, right? And so it just naturally flows within the context of the work I do. So again, I feel I'm pretty privileged in that respect. But for people who don't know me or in my world, I really hope, and I was intentional within asking questions within the film, right? Because I want people to walk away and for some of those questions to be resonating with them, for them to be thinking and reflecting, and ideally if they were in the room watching with somebody else, that they can kind of finish the films, like all of our films, right? And be able to then engage in a conversation about, you know, what does this all mean in our world, and how do we start engaging in a conversation, and know that it doesn't have to be a conversation that's full of sadness. I think that was the other piece that I really was hoping. I didn't want a film that was sad, and I don't think it was a sad film. I think it was an honest film, but I don't think it was a sad film. But I think that's, people assume if we're talking about death, if we're talking about dying, if we're talking about grief, then it's always sad. But that's just one of the millions of emotions that come with death, dying, and grief, right? It's just one small one, and it's not even necessarily the biggest one. So I hope that will shift some perspectives too, that it doesn't have to be a sad conversation. We don't have to walk away being, you know, miserable or kind of gloomy at the end of it, that something really positive and joyful can come out of it.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Steffi.
That was really good. So I have a conversation about death pretty regularly with my mom. She's not uncomfortable talking about it. We live in a community in Mexico where kidnappings are frequent, shootings are frequent. My family knows what we want to happen to us if anyone in the family were to be kidnapped. We know all these things. So in that sense, we have a very frequent conversation about it, and especially in religious circles as well. In religious circles, that's also a very frequent topic, because this idea of your eternal life and salvation, which I don't want to go into personal opinions about that, but in my community, it is a very common topic. And in my conversations with my mom about this film and the concept of death, she said, Steffi, I would like to go to Canada once I'm close to death, and then I just want to die in a hospice. I don't want to die the way we tend to live during the last years of our life back in my community, which doesn't offer the option of a hospice, or even the nursing home is understaffed and not, they don't have trained staff, and there is a lot of, she just doesn't want to be alone in this last years, and she doesn't want to have her children carry the entire burden for her. And that has been interesting conversations. We have a lot of conversation about how do we improve those circumstances for people back home, because we don't have the facilities, we don't have these options of a hospice, for example. I love the concept of hospice. I think the first time I knew about a hospice was through a short film that was actually nominated for an Oscar several years ago. I forget the name. It was a really good film on the concept of end of life care. And I've been intrigued by this idea of improving the circumstances in which we part from life. But more related to my film, I think we also don't need to shy away from talking about the death to younger people. There's never a time too early to talk about it. There's a lot we need to discuss before it's too late. We need to know what other people want to be treated in their last moments of life. And the best moment to talk about it is when nobody is in that condition. The best time to talk about it is the sooner you can.
I think your film, Steffi, reflects all of that so beautifully. The journey, the struggle through the topic, and I'm not giving away the ending or anything, but it just the way you end it is kind of where we need to be in terms of what her actions are at the end. So you beautifully illustrated what you just said in your film. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have had the complete opposite experience in terms of like discussions about death and dying, because no one around me until I created this short film discusses the subject. It's kind of like it happens and no one really talks about it, whether that be family or like friends. It's kind of just like it happened and then there's no conversation and then people move forward. So for me, it was really hard to really just sit down and actually think about it because I haven't really had conversations with other people about it. So I wanted to create something where other people were allowed to have those conversations if they were like me and didn't have anyone really around them to like who were willing to tackle the subject. So that's where I've had the opposite experience where it's been hard to find people who want to sit down and have those conversations. So I wanted to create something to allow people to sit down and have those conversations.
And you did a great job. Well done. And I unfortunately, I think we tend to have, I've had more of the experience that you talk about, Kay, in terms of people don't want to talk about that. Let's avoid that topic. So that your films, I see great potential to help us get this conversation open. So thank you for that.
Yes. And to further that, is there anything that you are working on now, or is there a way for people to follow you, to stay up to date for what comes next?
So, I mean, I'm always working on something. What it becomes, I don't know. So, I mean, the best way to kind of keep up to date with just kind of what I'm doing generally is probably on Instagram. Brian R. Douglas is where I am on Instagram. But over the past several years, I've been working on a portrait project called 5 a.m., where I document shift workers. So that's an ongoing project. I think I've done about 30 portraits so far. I mean, COVID obviously shut me down because I can't go into workspaces and things like that. So that will be an ongoing project. Currently working with a friend on a documentary on Bud's department store. So he and I had the opportunity to spend time at the department store. Bud's was a staple in downtown Kitchener for generations. I think they opened in 1926. So we had the opportunity to spend several weeks with them before the closing, interviewing staff, interviewing customers, the Buds themselves. So it's been a long time in the process making that film, just because of it's a passion project. So life takes precedent over passion projects at times. So, but that's in the works. We're hoping to have the trailer finished ideally this week to send off to the Buds for kind of a review. And then, like I mentioned before the Buds, before this hospice piece came to be, I do want to create a documentary again, called Anticipations in Life and Death. So I have it all on paper and it's all in my head. the hope, and if anybody is listening to this and feels that they fit or have experience to share, I want to connect with people who are anticipating the birth of a child while also anticipating the death of a loved one. And how do those two worlds intersect? How do they influence each other? How does it impact your ability to truly relish, enjoy the anticipation of a new life while also grieving and preparing to mourn somebody that you also equally love, right? And how does one influence the other? How do they play off of each other? And how does it influence that process on both ends of life? So I've had that for a while, kind of. Again, it's all on paper, and I have my artist statement, like it's ready to go. It's just a matter of, again, COVID kind of impacted that, but also finding, one or two families who are actually willing to participate in two really different emotional states, two very emotional, vulnerable places to be in, and then to have that documented and filmed and talk about it. But that's my big pipe dream hope of a film to create, is that project. So I hope that people can stay tuned for that to one day actually come to be.
Steffi.
Oh, you're muted, Steffi.
I went ahead of myself and I talked about my future projects earlier. So yeah, I have that project about science literacy and science hesitation and how to navigate these complicated conversations around polarizing topics without causing more polarization. So this entire concept of being more understanding of where people come from and why it's not equally easy for anyone to accept facts or public health recommendations as they come. So it's not as easy as I believe the science or I don't believe the science. It's not as black and white of a story. And this idea of life not being binary is a key theme in my life. I don't believe in absolute or extremisms. And that is what a lot of my projects focus on. And that other project that I mentioned about identity when there's a loss of faith. Those are the main projects I have planned at the moment. And I hope to keep working on other projects. I don't have a personal portfolio yet. I'm working on a portfolio page. But for now, most of my work, if anything can be seen online, it's on my Instagram page, steffi.reimer. Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay.
In terms of anything I'm currently working on, I really love the idea of combining film and photography. So I started working on a Through the Lens series, capturing different things around me and different stories through the lens. And that's my main, I guess, passion project right now, just going out and capturing different things and having the stories tell themselves. And another short that I'm working on is called Her Diary, and it's about how we are connected throughout different parts of the world, that a lot of people have similar stories, even though they come from different backgrounds. That's another thing that I'm working on. In terms of following my work, most of it in terms of photography is on Instagram at Next Level K. But I hope moving forward to continue to do different contests and continue to just like put my work out there and not being afraid to do so. So hopefully it will be seen in that way.
Well, I mean, on behalf of Griff, it would make me so happy to show your films in the future through our festival. This work has been terrific, and what you're working on sounds equally interesting, and I'm sure it'll be equally fantastic. So thank you all three for absolutely remarkable films. This partnership is something that we've been working on for a while, and I think that this is the dream, to have these results and to have such conscientious and thoughtful filmmakers at the end here, having this conversation with us and starting that conversation in the community. So yes, from Griff and the hospice, Brian, Steffi, and Kay, thank you so much.
Thank you. This was an awesome
you.
opportunity.
It was an amazing experience.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.